how do they cope with that? And I think there is just something too about he even, and it's his just sort of his general outlook. He talks about, everyone's scared when the fighting starts. You just try to survive.
Yes.
And then there's the other point where he goes, whatever happens, happens.
In the
and
book,
I think
he
that's
says
his, like,
he didn't want to get close to people in the war because he knew they could be dead in a second. So why do I want to even bother?
Right.
I think another thing in the book that showed his vulnerability, which I guess I wish part of the movie captured more, was, even how he lost his virginity. I mean, it was just such a, he was like...
Almost a cliche.
He was a vulnerable person back in the day. Like, he was invulnerable as he kept growing because of all these experiences. But he was originally...
He was a father of daughters.
And
you just think of that was a
right. 4 daughters.
But it was almost like he was just a manager. I mean, I don't know how many hugs he gave. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
You know, it was interesting because they did talk about his stutter, or his stammer. That he had, and actually, because I watched it twice too, and I actually thought the movie was even more beautiful the second time.
Agreed. Yeah.
There was something about seeing the second time that just kind of like
you just let it wash over it.
Yeah. But you saw how De Niro actually did an unbelievable job because you didn't know if it was a nervousness, but after reading the book and they talked about his stammer, and he only talks about in one section when he meets another person. And he goes, in the book, he says he thought he was making fun of him, but he didn't know he had a stammer too. But De Niro did a really good job when he... it's very, just even when he got on, when he talked to Hoffa for the first time, and he goes, I thought I was talking to Patton or something.
Right.
Right. Yes. Well, I love that too, the description of Patton, because I don't know a lot of that history, really, unfortunately, and just to hear how cold-blooded that guy was, too.
He was.
I mean, I knew, but you hear it or you read it in a book, and it becomes more pronounced.
Yeah, he was.
He thought prisoners cost too much. I mean, he was... he is, sometimes when we talk about other... countries and the way they treat prisoners of war. They shot up a whole bus of prisoners once. He was famous for they are collateral, they are baggage, they are a burden.
I gotta see George C. Scott. I've never seen that Patton movie.
Just watch it.
You've never seen that?
Oh my
God!
I know.
Francis Ford Coppola screenplay too.
Oh, yeah.
Did he?
Okay.
He wrote that.
He wrote that.
Actually, I never knew that.
Yeah, that's his screenplay. And the big thing at the quick tangent to bring it to The Godfather, that famous scene at the beginning of The Godfather with I believe in America. That started because Patton starts with the famous, man, when you're out there and you stick your hand into a fire. So a friend of his said, like, I just love that opening speech at Patton. Like, you got to give this an opening speech like that. So he's like, all right. So he writes like one of the most famous opening things, and then cut to Marlon Brando petting the cat.
Yeah, he just a quiet, darkened room.
Come to me and say, Godfather, help me. That's sorry, but that's just funny that the connection with that. So coming as a total just from a cinematic thing and not having read the book, how did you, watching the movie with the non-linear way of telling the story, the weird sort of interstitial, the framing of it, I guess, around primarily, the Jimmy Hoffa-ness, and then the going back, going forward, and...
That's hard to follow.
Well, I didn't mind it, but I wish, again, I love the relationship Charles Brandt had with Frank Sheeran, and that was lost in the movie. You know what I mean? That was a beautiful...
Well, he's like the main actor that you never see, because he's talking to that one person the whole thing.
I would have loved Brandt to be narrating rather than Sheeran.
Well, but so then that raises the question of, at the very beginning, when they sort of clearly do that, like... So almost like homage to the Copa scene, the tracking shot in Goodfella, but it's in the nursing home.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that weird device, why do you think there was that thing where you hear voiceover, and then De Niro starts speaking, like almost mid-sentence?
I think they wanted to show
and he's
how
clearly
alone
talking.
he was.
Well, that's the thing. Who is he talking to?
But I think it was also a bit of dementia.
Oh, okay.
You're at the end of your life, and these voices come to you as you are leaving the world. And as you leave the world, those people who are most important to you come again.
Okay.
And you speak to them, and you hear them, and you question them. And
Is that? Do you think so? Do you think that's just sort of him doing his own penance to himself or to the priest?
I think it was just human. I think it was just humanness.
Well, see, I was sure that he was being interviewed. That he was
telling them.
He was clearly telling it.
And I thought it was
I mean, his facial
sorry,
reactions.
guys, but I didn't love this movie.
Really?
No, that's fine.
I thought it was an hour too long.
Yeah.
And I came out, as I told Roxanne earlier, with my major question was, what made Frank Frank?
Yeah.
And in the book, you find out what made Frank Frank.
Right.
And how it was that he was capable of basically going out late, killing Joey Gallo, then going home and in the morning eating cereal while he's watching the news footage of the murder of Joey Gallo.
Right.
Yeah.
And how calm he was about all of it.
Right. Yeah.
And how part of that culture, you do your job. You just what it is.
I think, Karen, I think that if the scenes had been longer scenes, I don't mind the time. I'll sit there for 3 hours. I love the story, but I just need more. I don't know. I need more emotion that I thought the book portrayed, which did not get into the movie. But
they did a very good job with that topic, that theme in Goodfellas. If you remember the Ray Liotta as a child growing up.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, who did he look up to? I mean, what did he fasten on?
Right.
And his parents were obviously they were afraid of the mob, but they tried to tell him to stay away with them, but he was just fixated on that.
Right.
And I think that's an important component for these people, is how they grow up, with their own belief system, what they latch on to.
He quits high school because he broke the principal's jaw.
Yeah,
He basically, I mean, you do that, you're done.
And both those main characters came from working Irish families.
Right.
Henry Hill and French.
Yeah.
Real quick, so about the de-aging, there was an interesting New York, I think it was in New York Magazine or New York Times Magazine, they talk about the de-aging, but sort of, and if you think about it, like, the framing device is, this is Frank Sheeran telling us this story, essentially, like, we're who he's rambling to, or we're the priest, or whatever, or we're watching as God, basically, but when you think about the nature of memory and the de-aging, like, when we think back on when we were younger, I mean, that's the thing. Do we actually truly, like, they kind of talk about that of, like, do we fully remember, I don't know, it's almost like the fallacy of memory a little bit of, like, were our eyes that Polar Express dead? No, I mean, that was bad. I'll admit that was bad.
Yeah.
But, like, the overall de-aging of it.
It's that first shot of De Niro in the truck.
Right.
That I think throws off, I think, everyone who's watching.
It almost looks like a comic.
I felt the same way about Bombshell, though, with Charlize Theron. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I haven't
But
seen
they
that.
made her, they tried too much, and she actually asked for it. She said,
Right.
I don't want to see Charlize when I walk by a mirror. I want to see Megyn Kelly. So she asked for it, but it threw me out of the movie. It's almost like, I want the human to act.
Right.
Well, I think what was the problem, so you have that first scene where De Niro, and all of a sudden the gas station and stuff like that, and then it cuts to him, and right away you just know that there's something
weird
glaucoma
going on.
It's like foggy blue eyes,
Right?
And the shape of his face changed.
Because it just the way the software gets on there.
It's the beta test.
Right.
I'm sure that'll get a lot better.
It totally will. It already has.
The interesting thing I read about it, and what I noticed, I thought that the facial was fine, but the movement, there was
you can't change that.
There was a scene where Pacino, who I guess is almost
gets
80,
out of the chair.
He goes to get out of a chair, and they said, "Well, we're going to have to do that again because you really need to get out of that chair."
Hoffa's supposed to be 49, and
so he
Pacino's 76.
Jumps out of the chair, and he says, 62.
Right, yeah.
But that's it. So they're at the truck, and when De Niro comes around and to shake Pesci's hand, they look like two old guys with young faces. And there was something very false when they're... So what's your name?
Right. Yeah.
And they're like hunched over, and he's calling him kid.
Or when he's
and Pesci's calling him.
When
you're back in business, kid.
When he's beating up the grocer too. Like there's the physicality, like
he's throwing
that
the
looks
guns.
like
He's throwing the guns in the water. He looks like
a 60-year-old guy doing that, not a 40-year-old guy.
That's it. That's not in the book. that I recall.
No, it was not.
No, it was not.
And
I wondered about that. I kept looking for that.
What's that?
The grocery store.
I don't remember.
And it was isolated, and it was incredibly violent and totally unnecessary.
But I read somewhere that one of the daughters
it was there for character development.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. But then when you also so think about that and how he comes in and Joe the grocer is saying like, come on, he doesn't have, he touched you? Let's go. Like, and he just goes and then just beats the shit out of him, basically, just right there in the street and everything. But then when you go to when he's going to take out Joey Gallo and all the guns and how methodical and how workmanlike, like everything, how disconnected, how unemotional he was with all these other hits, how quick, just 2 minutes, boom, bang, 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 out into the car.
The daughter
boom.
At the end say we couldn't come to you for
right,
anything.
yeah.
They needed a story to show,
right, of like,
but it's
but his protection is more frightening.
Right, you're right.
It's actually one of the true Frank
Sheehan
Sheehan stories that you can actually account for. They actually talk. There's one of the daughters who did an interview and talks about this grocer that was that was the story that all the kids had in their head was this one story. So it's actually not from a book; it's from an article from one of the daughters who talked about it.
When he goes after the grocer, it's something visceral and it has and it comes
animalistic.
From it is animalistic, but it was his family.
Promotion finally.
It was the
That's
don't
human.
touch my family.
Yeah.
My family is sacred. And when he did, he lost his mind.
Yeah.
But then he lost his daughter.
Well, of course he did.
Right.
Of course he lost his daughter.
Years later.
He didn't think
No.
No.
Every time he saw Peggy after
that, she was silent.
She just had this look.
But I think that shows like he's that raw animal. His instinct is that. But then when he's asked to do something truly terrible, he takes this workman, yeoman's idea of all right, nope, that's going to be too loud. No, that's going to be too much. You want more accuracy with that? Yeah.
Go to the bathroom first.
Go to the bathroom first. You don't want to be
being a professional.
Well, and that's just it. Yeah. And so when he behaves totally unprofessionally and just visceral, just
That's a great point.
I mean that to me was.
One thing with the book that that they could have added a lot more to it was the character, his driver, the red,
crazy was it crazy?
No, wasn't crazy.
Crazy Joe Davola.
No,
I got it in my
not Chucky O'Brien. That's the stepson. The driver, Francis the red. He shot bugs with him.
Yeah, I've got it in my notes somewhere. But
and they talked about because remember they're talking about in the book the realtor.
Yes.
There's something with the realtor. And actually, it connects to the driver.
And how long it took to
get... and actually, that was something that Charles Brandt was saying, like, holy cow, are these two the same people?
Right?
Yeah, the redhead.
And I loved...
Is that the real estate agent, too, who operated the house where Hoffa was taken?
I found that a little hard to swallow in the book.
That was it was a lot. It was a lot coming at the end, but it was kind of...
Right, but there was there were two afterwards?
It was haunted.
There were two afterwards, because one of them, there were questions that Frank had answered, which he could not print because people were still alive.
Oh, right.
And so a year later, when the paperback edition came out, he added the 2005 section because whoever it was that were mentioned in that section were now dead.
Oh, okay.
And then there were other questions that I think Charles Brandt had, which then got answered between 2005 and 2016, I think, when the bigger section came
I like
out.
that part in the movie where they say, like, when the lawyer died.
I'm
like,
sorry.
Who took him?
I know. Who took him
Cancer.
out? Cancer. Well, then the question of who are you protecting, they ask him at the end.
They're all gone.
Okay, so I'm going to close the podcast just because we'll run out of time, but thank you all for participating in this. And we are going to have a debate, if you guys are willing, on At the Movies with Gus Velasquez, and I'll tell you about dates.
I'm in.
Forthcoming. All right. Good night, and thank you for participating.